Good morning, good evening. I'm Judith Cano, responsible for the Global Engagement Office at University of Deusto in Spain. Welcome you all to the Higher Education Summer Forum, third session. The third session, the Civic University, a university in the service of society by University College Cork in Ireland. Today's roundtable will discuss around the third mission of universities and how University College Cork responds to COVID-19, focus on delivering meaningful support and impact for people, communities, and organizations. It is my pleasure to introduce you today's session moderator, Dr. Jean van Sideren Law, Associate Vice President and Director of European Relations and Public Affairs at University College Cork, to whom now I give the floor. Thank you, Jean.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's morning here in Ireland. You're all very, very welcome to this session this morning, and it gives me great pleasure to moderate it. I'm speaking here from University College Cork, a university that's wholly committed to the third mission. Needless to say, we're committed to the first and second missions of teaching and research, but the dissemination of information is obviously very, very important to us. And in this context, we're delighted to be part of the UNIC consortium, where we are about to embark on a pilot project to develop a university of post-industrial cities. I'm here this morning with some of my colleagues from University College Cork and a colleague from the City of Cork. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you in turn, and over the next hour and a half or so, each contributor will present to you on the perspective, from their perspective, in how UCC engages with the community and how we are taking our mission as being a key contributor to society wholly to heart, and how it's a key part of our strategy. In the first instance, I will introduce you to Dr. Martin Galvin, who's our Civic and Community Engagement Officer at the university. Martin is going to make a short presentation and then give us the context. What is a civic university? What is the legislative framework in which we operate? Why do we do it? And what are the benefits to a university? Then we will speak to Mr. Fergal Reedy. Fergal represents our city partner. In the UNIC consortium, each of the universities are working with their partner cities, hand in glove. This is going to be a university of post-industrial cities. So it is a key relationship between the university and the city. And Fergal will give his perspective on the role of a civic university, and indeed how UNIC is key to the macro plan in this region in Ireland. I'll then pass the chair to Professor Fiona Carney, who's director of the Glucksman Gallery, and she will speak about the role of the gallery and the role of culture and art as a means of engagement with the city. We will then speak to our colleagues, Dr. Pirish McHenry, who is involved in migration studies at University College Cork, who will speak specifically to the University of Sanctuary and the City of Sanctuary. And then we will conclude with a discussion from my two esteemed colleagues, Dr. Jackie O'Riordan and Dr. Mike Fitzgibbon, who will speak again specifically about work that we have been doing in the city. So without further ado, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, and I will invite my colleague, Dr. Martin Galvin, to address you. Thank you.
Jean, thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. I was really heartened to pick up the newspaper this morning, The Guardian, and see comments from Kirsty Williams, who's the Minister for Education in Wales, where she's committed to giving 50 million additional euros to sterling to Welsh universities and to help them through the COVID crisis. But she did this in the context, and she's called for a new civic mission to ensure working with communities is part of the DNA of each Welsh university. And I thought they were just very inspiring words and comments for her for the morning that's in it. I want to talk this morning about what this civic university is, and just maybe talk a little bit about the definitions and what we mean by a civic university. But I want to start first by some very inspiring comments from our President of Ireland, who's talked about universities being part of our societies. And he said, what's the point unless the accumulated knowledge, insight, and vision are put at the service of community? With the privilege to pursue knowledge comes the civic responsibility to engage and put that knowledge to work in the service of humanity. So I think our president has really captured what a civic university is all about. So UCC, we're part of a global movement of civically engaged and socially responsible higher education institutions. The Civic University is a model where the university is working with society to advance human progress, to solve the issues of its time, and to cultivate the knowledge needed to develop cohesive democratic societies. And there are a number of different dimensions to this. One is that the university is actively engaged with the wider world, as well as the local community or place in which it's located. It also takes a holistic approach to engagement. It sees institution-wide activity and not confined to specific individuals or teams. So engagement is an institution-wide activity. The Civic University has a strong sense of place. It recognizes the extent to which its location helps to form its unique identity as an institution. And it has a sense of purpose about what it's doing, not just what it's good at, but what it's good for in its local community and region. And it's willing to invest in order to have impact beyond the academy. It's transparent and accountable to its stakeholders and the wider public. And civic engagement itself describes the collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger communities for the mutual beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and been reciprocal. In Ireland, we have a very strong policy context for the Civic University. It's supported by our National Strategy for Higher Education, which asks that higher education institutions become more firmly embedded in the social and economic context of the communities they live in and serve. And as part of our funding framework, so our mission-based performance compact with our Higher Education Authority measures the extent to which our universities are engaging with community and with society. So there's a very strong policy context in Ireland for this. And in 2014, all of our university presidents signed a charter called the Campus Engaged Charter for Civic and Community Engagement, where we've committed to a number of different principles over the coming years to institutionalize civic engagement within our missions, within our identity, and within our culture. And there's a wider movement beyond Ireland. UCC, we're part of the Talhors network, and we work with a global coalition of 402 other community engaged universities across 78 countries with a combined enrollment of 6 million students. So the Civic University is a powerful international movement. We play a leading role in the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities. We're also a member of the European Living Knowledge Network, where we work alongside very highly ranked universities in Europe to provide free research support to community organizations in our regions and in our localities. In 2017, UCC, we launched a Civic and Community Engagement Plan. We're the first university in Ireland to do so. It was launched by our Mayor of Cork. It was a very powerful civic moment for Cork at that time. And we've gotten a lot of global recognition for what we're doing. So our civic efforts and our civic mission is making an impact. We were recognized by the Times Higher Education Institute in 2020, Times Higher Education University Impact Rankings in 2020, we're ranked 32nd in the world for impact, for societal impact. So the difference our civic mission is making has been recognized now by these ranking bodies. We're ranked first in Ireland, working towards the UN goal of peace, justice, and strong institutions. And in 2019, we were the first place winner of the McJanet Prize for Community Engagement from the Talhors Network. We also believe in kind of evaluating what we're doing. And we were evaluated in 2016 by the US Carnegie Foundation, whose community engagement classification is the leading international benchmark for university community engagement. So our institutional commitment is strong, and these awards that we're succeeding with is an outcome of that. Our research strategy is a very clear focus on addressing societal challenges and advancing social and scientific research with society so that it makes a difference. We're unique in Europe in some ways in that our academic strategy has integrated community engagement across all of our academic programs and courses. And we have 2 dedicated programs to support that. Our Connected Curriculum and Graduate Attributes program, which promotes citizenship, global citizenship. We're nurturing a very strong culture of staff and student volunteering on campus. We have 46% of our students volunteering on an everyday basis. Students who complete 40 hours of volunteering get accreditation from UCC. And we're a leading centre for cultural engagement in the region and beyond, which Fiona's going to talk about in a few minutes. We have a very strong emphasis on partnership and working in an integrated regional manner. And Fergal will talk a little bit about that in a minute as well. But there's a sense that regional development based on economic innovation and competitiveness alone, that's increasingly been challenged. A more multifaceted approach involves a focus on social equality, cohesion, democratic participation, environmental and economic sustainability. And there's a real growing realization that institutions that make up a city need to work together. So this new idea of leadership of place informing how we lead in our region and working together in a very strong interdisciplinary manner across institutional boundaries. And that informs a lot of work that we do in UCC, particularly in response to COVID-19, where we work very closely with our health service executive, with our city, and with various different civil society organizations to help with critical research, learning, and infrastructure supports to help people through the crisis. We've mobilized our human and intellectual capacity in a very open and sharing manner. And across everything that we do, partnerships are really, really important, and particularly focused on themes of social justice, health, environment, and learning outcomes for people and communities. So what we're doing makes a real difference for our locality and our region. We work in a very interagency, multidisciplinary way, and with a number of different forums in the city, from Cork Healthy Cities to our Food Policy Council, Cork Environmental Forum, the City of Sanctuary, which Pierce is going to talk about in a little while, and Jackie and Mike, Cork Age Friendly City, UNESCO City of Learning, and on and on and on. So a lot of the work that we do is very interagency focused, very much in partnership with our city, county, and civil society partners. We do a lot of work on Irish language and promotion and community development in our Gaeltacht and our Irish-speaking regions. And reaching out to marginalised rural communities is very, very important to us. And one recent example was where we helped to establish community radio stations on marginalised islands off the coast of Cork. We work very much nationally and locally in promoting the move to a low carbon future and environmental sustainability. And our Marai Centre is working very closely with Dingle community, which is another rural area, to develop innovative ways to build community capacity and empower people for climate action. Other examples are where our Centre for Cooperative Studies is helping to develop the Irish microfinance sector locally and nationally. So I'll turn it back over to Jean, and thank you very much. I was just setting the context there, and I think we're going to move forward now with some examples of the work that UCC does.
Thank you very, very much, Martin. But before we move to our next speaker, I just want to ask you one question. And that is, for those who are tuning in this morning and are interested, and they may not be as far along the path as University College Cork is in the context of civic engagement, could you say maybe what are the 3 things that a university needs to have if it wants to embark on a journey of success relating to its 3rd mission?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to recognize the strengths that are within. And university, the civic mission is very much driven by the kind of grassroots commitment of our staff and students. So people care about engaging with society. I think that's just a natural thing of being a citizen, being a human. So to recognize that and celebrate that, and kind of to know what you have and to nurture it and mind it. I think the second thing is that you need to provide some basic kind of infrastructure supports to help with coordination, which is what we're doing in UCC. So we have very kind of light touch infrastructure support to kind of nurture that ecosystem that is naturally there within the university. And I think the third thing then is to work with your national partners. So we're doing this as a movement within Ireland, and we're working with our other university partners as part of the National Campus Engage initiative, which is driven by the Irish Universities Association. And I think that's a really, really important thing as well. So we're learning from each other. And finally, if I could add a fourth, would be there is a broader international movement as well, and it's to kind of reach out. So we're working very closely with the Talhorst network. So there's institutions all over the world doing this kind of thing, and through participating in that network, we're learning about this work and we're sharing with each other and supporting each other. So I would say those four things are important.
Thank you very much, Martin. It becomes kind of core to the culture of an institution. You know, it's
Absolutely.
top down, bottom up, and so on.
Absolutely.
So clearly, and you mentioned it in your first slide, is that a key part of this is a sense of place. That it recognises the extent to which its location, as in University College Cork, being located in Cork, helps to form its unique identity as an institution. So in that context, it gives me great pleasure to invite Mr. Fergal Reedy, who's Director of Strategic and Economic Development in Cork City. And Fergal and his team are working with us very closely through the UNIC Consortium. So good morning, Fergal. You're very, very welcome.
Thanks, Jean, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this. I don't have a presentation, but I have a few key points that I want to make in terms of third level, its role in the city, and the importance of UCC and Munster Technological University to Cork. Allow me to give some context to this. Cork recently had a boundary extension to accommodate compact growth so that we can plan it more cohesively. The administrative area is 210,000 people, serving a metropolitan area of about 400,000 people and a 1 hour catchment of about 1 million people. So we are the hub for a region, we are the driver of region. The metropolitan area is a key driver for the area going to the industrial piece. And we've attracted over 169 foreign companies employing 69,000 people. And the GVA per employee is over 105,000 euros. So it's a very high value region. And that in itself poses challenges. Cork always had a tradition of industrialization, manufacturing and trading for centuries. And it's reflected in our coat of arms, indeed, which is two castles, which were actually more protection and customs and a ship. So we've traded; it's a part of our DNA. So the issue for us then is how do we continue, and not just as an economy, but as a society, to move up that value chain, or to sustain it and move up it. It causes challenges for us, but it causes broader societal challenges for us as well. We have no option but to innovate. We have no option but for, as a city and as a region, but to provide skills, to provide research, and to provide high value output. It's our only competitive edge. We do not have natural resources. Our skills, our research and development, and our innovation are central to what we do. So to that extent, the integral role that academia plays and the universities play in society of the Cork region is absolutely critical. Our innovation ecosystem, I would say, is strong, but poorly documented. We have a lot of high-class, world-class innovation in particular niches, nanotechnology, health, education, food, biopharma, medical devices, and so forth. And we have very good supports for research, innovation, spin-offs, and we're pretty successful at it. We just don't document it. We don't call it out for what it is very well. And that's not a criticism. We're just busy getting on with it. This is timely for us, though, because we are now preparing the first of 3 city development plans that will guide the development of the city over the next 20 years. And we're targeted with an ambition by central government to grow by 50% of that period. In other words, we will drive balanced regional development in Ireland. Dublin is growth, economic growth, population growth is centralised in Dublin. Dublin is at capacity, and government recognised that, and to that extent, Cork as the second city is recognised as a city of scale that will continue to attract investment, skills, and development to counterbalance Dublin. But to do that, we must make it a city that's appealing, and it goes back to an important point that was made earlier on of place. The place-making agenda is very important for us. So we must be attractive to attract skills and to attract skilled labour. That means that education, culture, society, leisure all need to integrate into one cohesive messaging package and everything else. And you'll see that in what we've done with the Grow in Cork, along with a whole lot of partners. If you have a look at the Grow in Cork website and initiative, it's a joint placemaking initiative addressing all those issues. So that's very important for us. The other piece that's important in the development plan, typically development plans look at spatial development of a city, where jobs will go, where housing will go, where leisure will go. That has to end. We now need to move it on to another level. It doesn't work. We have in Cork areas of high affluence with no jobs and deprivation with a lot of jobs. So it's just not working. People in deprived areas aren't accessing employment opportunities at their doorsteps, and people in affluent areas are commuting to jobs. So this model is not sustainable. What we want to do is look at the compact growth for the city, and that's in fact why that we have the boundary extension, so that we can manage the growth in a more comprehensive and cohesive way. That is the city, the livable city, the city of neighbourhoods, or the 15-minute city. And the COVID pandemic, along with climate change, kind of emphasized the need for this. We appreciate space more, we appreciate our neighbourhoods more, we appreciate our environment more, and we appreciate the interaction with our partners more. So within 15 minutes, you need to have housing, you need to have jobs that are appropriate for the people living in the houses, and you need to have a range of services. That addresses mobility, and it also addresses social inclusion. It also addresses, to an extent, the kind of the decline of the high street, which actually Cork is experiencing to an extent, but not to the same extent as other cities, simply because we're blessed with proprietor managed businesses and businesses that will innovate in the city centre. So what we need to do then is not just look at things spatially in isolation, but holistically. We have to look at education opportunities, employment opportunities, and mobility and sense of place within all of our neighbourhoods. That's the only way we can advance in a sustainable way, and in a way that will appeal for us to grow to the figures that I mentioned earlier on, grow by 50% over the next 20 years. So for us to do that, I think one initiative that was pointed out earlier on, we have a number of initiatives, but one of them is the UNESCO Learning City. And within that, we have the neighbourhoods of learning, the learning neighbourhoods. These are very important, and I'd like them to expand much more than what they are at the moment. They are primarily targeted in, I would call it, deprived areas or inner city areas. And it's not just the accessible measures that universities can put in place to ensure that people can avail of education, but it's accessible within their communities and acceptable within their communities, that they can go to the centre and engage with UCC or the Munster Technological University at their locality, and it's socially acceptable to do so. And that's a very important stepping stone. So we have 20 years to hit the targets in a sustainable way. I'm confident we will do that, simply because of the success we've had in the past. There's a site, an image behind me of an old industrial site in the city, which was the Docklands. We want to regenerate that. It currently employs, there are currently 2,000 people working there. We have plans to regenerate that to an area that houses about 30,000 people, and the same again in terms of employment. But we're putting education and research and development and placemaking central to our plans for this. We simply articulate our ambition for this district as a great place to live. That's a simple thing to say. It's very complicated to achieve, and will involve years of engagement with the community, with the stakeholders, with academia, with the schools at all levels, to ensure that we create this cohesive place. So that's a broad summary. I hope it's helpful to give context in terms of Cork, but the importance that we place on this agenda. Thanks, Jean.
Thank you very, very much, Fergal. I mean, there's a lot to be said for being in the right place at the right time. And you could say, in a sense, that the opportunity that now is available to us through the work that we're going to do with this consortium, it certainly gels the connectivity between the universities and the city, but it also affords an opportunity to learn from our partner institutions in collaboration with their cities. So I think we have an exciting 3 years ahead of us in terms of that connectivity. And I think you very clearly articulated that, really we can't fulfill our mission and objectives without working in partnership with yourselves. And the bottom line is that it is to the best benefit of the people in the place. And that's what we're all about. So Fergal, thank you very much. I'm conscious of the fact that I know that you may have to depart from this forum a little earlier than others to attend something else. So at this juncture, just let me say thank you very much for joining us, and feel free to depart, but we'd like you to stay as long as you possibly can. So on that note,
thanks, Jean.
Thank you, Fergal. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Professor Fiona Carney. Fiona is director of the Glucksman Gallery at University College Cork. And of course, she will speak about the Glucksman Gallery, but we can say at the university that we're incredibly proud of the terrific work that is being done through the Glucksman at University College Cork. So good morning, Fiona, and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. So as Jean said, I'm the director of the Glucksman Gallery, and I'm just going to try and bring up my screen here so that hopefully you can see a picture of the museum, which is located in the historic lower grounds of the university, critically just one of the first buildings that you will meet as you come in through the main ceremonial gates to the university. So we act as a bridge between the academic world that we serve and the wider community, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And the Glucksman is conceived as a place where people can explore and enjoy contemporary art, but through that connect to the wide-ranging research and innovation that exists within the campus. So we hope that there's a flow out from the exhibitions that we produce, but in recent years, through the communities that we engage with, a flow of information in to the university about the publics it serves. And I thought that perhaps it would be interesting to start, given that we're all thinking about the pandemic and illness. One of the most important exhibitions that kind of set us on this path was a collaboration that we did with colleagues in the Alimentary Pharmabiotics Centre in UCC, the world-leading institute on the microbiome, about the experience of illness in art. And that presented ideas from our colleagues through art. And I often come back to a quote by one of my colleagues, Professor Fergus Shanahan, where he said that, science gives us a way of thinking about disease, but the arts and humanities provide insight, context, and understanding of what it means to be ill. Diseases are black and white, described by facts, figures, categories, and concepts, but illness is colored, nuanced by context, and shaped by individual circumstances. So of course, while we absolutely need the factual and incredible research being done by our colleagues, I think the arts and the humanities have a critical role to play in communicating and enabling new knowledge, and indeed that knowledge exchange to emerge. And you can see here that the exhibition that we did was covered in the Lancet journal, as well as reaching critically and chronically ill people in Ireland who felt that they were able to connect with the medical community in a way that perhaps hadn't been possible before. So I'll just look briefly at some of the exhibitions. We continued that engagement with our colleagues in APC Microbiome Ireland very recently with an exhibition that looked at circadian rhythms, looking at the idea of contemporary art and biological time. We've also collaborated with the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences, looking at animal habitats in art. We've collaborated with the School of Architecture, looking at the ways in which architecture can be represented and discussed through art. We've had a partnership with the Cork University Business School on art and the market. And this in fact led now to a teaching module with their MA, where we teach the economics students on ideas of value using contemporary art as an example to do this. We looked at global borders and national boundaries, a very important topic, in partnership with our colleagues in Spanish, Portuguese and Latin American studies. And interestingly enough, we had looked at the Irish border at that point when we were presenting the show as something that was more resolved, and Brexit happened during that exhibition. And it was wonderful to pull in colleagues from government and politics to help us to discuss this more widely at a time when wider society was very focused on these issues. It was mentioned previously about the leading research in the Tyndall National Institute, and we have done exhibitions with them on the art and science of light. We've worked with our English department, looking at commemoration, very important in Ireland and indeed in Europe over the last number of years, as we have commemorated many centenaries of significance, and it was important to look at that in the museum context. And with support from a Creative Europe grant, we collaborated with partners in Italy and Croatia and our own disability support service in UCC to develop an exhibition that would enable access for people with visual impairment. I'm very glad to say that we have, in the last round of Creative Europe, been given further funding to develop more experiences in a museum context for people with visual impairment. And I suppose one of the things that a university museum can do is not only connect the communities, but connect it to the research and the most cutting level information that is available, and then share it as widely as possible. So that European network that Jean and our colleagues here today have formed becomes really critical for ways in which we can even further extend the knowledge exchange that we hope happens in the Glucksman. At the moment, and we've just opened our doors after the pandemic, we have a focus on the university art collection. And I wanted to focus a little bit on that to pick up some of the ideas that Fergal and Martin have spoken about how art can connect communities back into the university. Here we are looking at 5 wonderful portraits that were done by an Irish artist, Dara McGrath, who worked in collaboration with communities in those learning neighbourhoods that Fergal was speaking about. And to look at the commemoration and an investigation indeed of the role of women in Cork over the last 100 years. And we worked closely with this group of older people. And in the first instance, we placed the portraits into civic buildings across the city. And this, as Fergal will recognise, is our own city hall. And we placed it alongside quotes from the older people, and looking at just, I suppose, to place their voices back into the public realm, something that we could do by working in an off-site way. And I think that one of the things to remember is just how much enjoyment there can be in a social context for our communities, some of whom might not have engaged with the university before they come into the Glucksman. So again, our spaces acting as a bridge and then a way to amplify their wonderful experiences and life experiences. And one of the things that I've certainly learned from our program working with the seniors is they are incredibly open to new experiences and contemporary art, and much less risk averse, I would say, than our teenagers when we're working with them. And this is a work that we did in the community with one of the oldest kind of brass bands in the city, a brass band that helped us to launch a work that we had did as part of that placemaking initiative that Fergal was speaking about. This is a transformation that we enabled working with the artist Deirdre Breen of an electrical supply building that sits just opposite the university gates. And one of the things that was remarked to me when we launched this building was, isn't it wonderful that the university is reaching out? Now, this is literally just across the main gates from the university, but oftentimes our beautiful campus, although it is open and we encourage the public to access it, can seem something of a fortress or an ivory tower. And one of the things that Glucksman does is we try to reach out beyond those gates to encourage communities to engage and to use art as a way to make place, to make their voices and views heard. We did this, in fact, throughout the pandemic by working with artists to create a billboard project. So at a time when we were only able to travel 20 kilometers from our place of residence, we put these posters all across the city so that there would still be an opportunity for people to engage with art during lockdown. And one of the things that was mentioned to me about this project was by one of the artists who participated, Leanne McDonough, who is a young traveller woman, a member of an ethnic minority group in Ireland. And she said that, in fact, for her, using the billboards was a great way to engage with people, that it shouldn't just be because our museum was closed that we were working off-site, because she felt that many of her community were more likely to do the walking tour and to look at the billboards than they would be to come into the museum. So we know that we have this job of work to do, and here is Leanne just outside the main gates with her work while the campus was still closed. This is just a month ago. We do a lot of work with the traveller community, and this is a beautiful exhibition that was done by young traveller girls who worked with us to create these wonderful representations of their own mobile homes. To present it, for them to present it back in the heart of the university was something that they kind of felt was very important, because it gives them a status and an importance that is really critical, that the university community shows that they value and welcome this community in particular. And we were very proud to work with the Traveller Visibility Group in Cork to create and develop a flag. It was a flag that they felt that they didn't have anything that represented or their community, and that they wanted to represent something different. So we developed a flag with them, and then that was hoisted over City Hall. So those collaborations that Fergal was talking about in the city between City Hall and the university are so important to value and connect communities. We also have a very developed schools program. So we welcome schools from across Munster to engage with us. And we make sure that we include the work of those schools in a civic engagement and in a dialogue about what our city should look like and what indeed the future of our city would look like. So last year we did a collaboration with Cork Chamber, which is the representative association of businesses in the city, and they were celebrating 200 years. And what we did was we asked primary and second and third level students. We had over 1,000 young people participate, and they presented us with views of what the city should look like in 200 years' time. And indeed, their vision of the city was really interesting, because it focused, as you might imagine, on the green agenda, on sustainability, but they were not afraid of density. They really wanted to see a more playful city. And what the chamber did was that they used these ideas to inform debates that were happening and are still ongoing about how we might shape the city. So again, the role here of the Glucksman is to facilitate that flow of ideas, to enable discussion that might emerge in these new ways between generations, and between the civic engagement of the city and the academic engagement of the city. We are, of course, aware, as Martin referenced, though, of the lack of access sometimes for rural communities. So in this case, we've developed a program where we loan out works from the university collection and we place them in the actual classrooms. And we enable artists to go out and work with these rural schools, and they then come back into us and present their work that they have developed in the university. And here they are with the county mayor at the time, presenting work in the building. And many of them, again, this will be the first visit they have had to the university, because many of them, and certainly it could be the first visit they have had to a cultural institution. So that engagement of access means that we hope that they will then choose UCC as their university of choice and come to live and eventually work here in the city. Currently, we also have an exhibition that was developed in partnership with the School of Law, which looks at children's rights in imaginary spaces, in the ways in which, in reading picture books and early literature, we find ways to develop and express our rights. And we invited 7 Irish illustrators to take themes from the UN Convention on Children's Rights, and we turned them into these extraordinary murals that you can see on the gallery walls. One of those murals looked at the rights of refugees, and while that's not there are some very explicit rights, it was an incredibly powerful image, I think, to have on the gallery wall. You can see here. And for us, it's very important because we have a sustainable program now with young refugees and asylum seekers and migrants in the city that we have developed with our colleagues who will speak to you later, Mike and Jackie, when we couldn't have done it without the support that they gave to us to connect with these communities. And that now informs, I think, part of the role. We've had a small role in helping to develop the University of Sanctuary, and we continue to provide a very important platform for these young people. This is a mural that we did in a city park in Fitzgerald's Park, which brought their incredible creativity and talent out to feel part of the fabric of the city. We have enabled them to make films where they've presented them in the film festivals within the city. And at a public forum, one of the young people at a Q&A afterwards said that the Glucksman has become home to me, a place where you can come and express yourself. And that's what we hope, is that by enabling and supporting communities to come into the Glucksman, that we can create a feeling of belonging to the university and to the city, where we can learn from these communities about what we need to do to ensure that all ages and abilities continue to engage, not with us just here in the museum, but with the city and with the university, so that we can become the diverse, ambitious, and globally impactful city and university that we want to be. There's a lot of our work on our website, so you can see references to all that I've spoken about this morning at glucksman.org. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Fiona. And I know what we just got this morning was a brief overview of the extent of the work that's conducted through the Glucksman Gallery. A key to the Glucksman, of course, is the relationship you have with colleagues throughout the university, the city, but also international partners. And before we kind of move on to the next speaker, I wonder, could you comment on the international partnerships that you've brokered and maybe give an example of a project that involved that international dimension?
Yes, so I briefly touched on the exhibition that we developed with Creative Europe funding. And I think in the context of UNIC, it will be very important to look to those kind of European avenues of funding, which enable us to be much more ambitious about what we can do. So we have worked actually with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb, and I know that Croatia are one of our partners in UNIC, as well as with museums across Italy, to develop programs tactile programs that enable people with visual impairment to come in and be welcome in a museum. And that might seem like a little bit unusual because we often think of museums as entirely visual spaces, but contemporary art engages with all of our senses. And we here in the university have a wonderful disability support service that looks to find for quite radical ways of engaging with students. And over the next 2 years, we will be working with Child Vision here in Ireland and connecting them with European partners to look at ways in which we can share that knowledge. Because I suppose some of the projects that I've spoken about, they will be new to, not probably new to some of my colleagues. It's very hard to get the information out. And I think that those European networks become critical for sustaining that kind of learning so that it doesn't remain siloed here in Cork. And indeed, particularly that we have been able to learn from some of the extraordinary work being done by our colleagues in Italy and Croatia, and to learn about the differences where we need to adapt, but also ways then in which we can evolve our own programs in a European context. So it's very, very exciting for us to be part of UNIC, because I know from my own experience that that kind of learning accelerates in a real way the kind of access and inclusion programs that we hold here very dear in UCC and in the Glucksman.
Thank you very, very much, Fiona. And I think it's made a huge difference to the students of the university to have this conduit and this facilitator of connectivity locally and globally.
And to be honest, I couldn't do it without the students. So particularly that in the work that we do with young refugees and asylum seekers, we work with Fáilte Refugees, which is the UCC Student Society, and they support our programs. And again, another European program, Lergus, has this year given us funding to support those students with their learning. So really just to underline the significance of the European connections for our students at a local level.
Thank you very, very much, Fiona. And now we will move on to the next speaker, and that is my colleague, Dr. Piers McHenry. Piers is associated with the School of Geography in University College Cork. He's a lecturer in geography and in European studies, an individual who has served as a diplomat I won't say many years ago, but some years ago, Piers, and a great proponent and worker behind migration studies, was heavily involved in migration studies at University College Cork. And Fiona had mentioned the University of Sanctuary, and Piers is going to certainly take us through some of the things which we are doing under the auspices of the University of Sanctuary. So Piers, delighted to welcome you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, and good morning, everybody. Well, you've already heard some of the key themes that Fiona has evoked there. And I can only echo those. This is all about creating networks and bridging and forms of empowerment for people, irrespective of where they belong in the community, so that everybody feels equally respected and ultimately equally integrated. So let's talk a little bit about Ireland and Cork just for a moment to kind of give you the context. And I suppose the main point to make is that for centuries, Ireland was known as a country of emigration. That's what we've always done. From the Great Famine down to the fairly recent past, we were a country of emigration, and we always defined ourselves as that. And in about the last 30 years or so, that recently, everything has changed. So the percentage of people born outside Ireland now living in Ireland and in Cork City, in this case, is now very considerable. I'll show you in a moment. So we've had a whole change from being a country where people left to a country where people arrive. You may say that's very ordinary, but in the Irish context, it's actually quite new. It's just the last generation. And we're now getting, for the first time, for instance, a generation of younger people. Fiona touched on them already, whether they're asylum seekers and refugees, or whether they are simply the children of migrant workers who came here with their families. We're now seeing a huge change in Ireland. And even just to look at the distribution of the population in Ireland now, this is from the 2016 census, and you'll see that almost 12% of the population of Ireland now are actually, in terms of their nationality, they're not from this country. And in fact, it's really higher than that, because that does not include people who've acquired Irish citizenship since they came here. So the percentage of people born outside Ireland living here now is probably about 17%. And that's an enormous change compared to our entire previous history. So if we look at Cork City, for instance, here we have the main electoral divisions of the city. You can see the central part of it there down in the lower left-hand part of the screen. And I suppose the point to make is that the composition of the city has changed so much. Fergal already referred to the population of the city, which has been enlarged in the last year, 210,000. 14% of Cork City's population born outside the country, and compare that with 5% only 30 years ago. And asylum seekers, and I'm going to talk about them a bit more, something like 1,000 asylum seekers in Cork City and County. So that gives you the overall perspective. Most of the migrants here are from other parts of Europe, and that's through the EU freedom of movement, which we all benefit from. But this map shows that, in fact, in parts of the city, there are substantial numbers of people living here now who came from outside the European Union. So they are, in some ways, the people that we're most concerned with here. And that presents both challenges and very exciting opportunities. This rapidly changing population, the specific situation of marginalized migrants, which I want to talk a bit more about, and they in particular include the asylum seeking community in Cork and in Ireland more generally. And there are kind of two responses I'm going to touch on briefly this morning in our engagement with them. There's Cork City of Sanctuary and then the University of Sanctuary, which are parts of a broader movement. What you see, by the way, there in the photograph is a recent event which took place in the city centre, in the Cork Migrant Centre, which is on the site of a former convent. And this was part of a response across this city, as indeed worldwide, to the Black Lives Matter movement, and of course, recent events in the United States. And here we have a group of young people here in Cork, most of whom are from the asylum seeking community, but not all, and they organised this event themselves as part of that response. There's a particular condition or situation involving asylum seekers in Ireland, which is that until they get the right to remain here, or they get full status as refugees, they may in fact have to stay several years in what we call direct provision, which is a form of state-provided accommodation, although it's done through the private sector. And there are good things and bad things about this, probably more bad than good. And it does mean that while they're staying in these places, they cannot access, or most of them cannot access higher education. The majority cannot work. They live in very restricted conditions, so they can't, for instance, cook for themselves. We all know how important cuisine is in all of our cultures. So they live in a kind of a marginalized peripheral condition compared to the rest of society. And that can last for years. Whereas in fact, we would say that integration begins the moment the person arrives. And you have all of the negative results which spring from that, such as anxiety, depression, even suicide, ill health. These are all issues which afflict people in direct provision. So the responses that I want to mention briefly this morning, first of all, we have something called the Places of Sanctuary Ireland, which is a national movement, which, by the way, is taken from a British model founded in Sheffield in 2005. And the idea is that you promote integration, inclusion, and the welfare of refugees and asylum seekers by encouraging every sector of society to make a practical commitment. And the key point about the Places of Sanctuary movement is that it brings together the official or the statutory organisations, so the City Council, the health services, the Gardaí, that's the police service here, and all of these other official bodies, as well as the voluntary and community sector, but as well as that, a central role for asylum seekers, migrants, refugees themselves. So it's based on respect and empowerment and equal participation in the decision-making processes and creating bridges and processes of dialogue between all of these different actors. That's the key, in a word, to the whole Places of Sanctuary movement. And here in Cork, we have two manifestations of it. We have Cork City of Sanctuary, on the one hand, which is a city-wide group, and you can see some of the kind of activities which it engages with on the right-hand side of your screen. Research, there's a women's group, health and well-being, children and families, arts and culture. So every range of life, we're engaged in those matters, and typically each of those committees will have members on it who come from the Indigenous community, from the host community, but also from various parts of the migrant community itself. And it's really to put those people in relation to each other. And the key principle there, to go back to the screen a moment ago, is that these structures are relational. Cities are places where people encounter each other on a daily basis. They meet face to face, they get to know each other. So we're not really dealing with big issues of national policy here. We're dealing more with the human and the daily interactions which people have with each other. And that's the essence of what lies behind the ethos of the City of Sanctuary movement. And just to give you a few examples of some of the things which we've done in the last few months, in fact, since COVID-19 changed all of our lives. Developing residence platforms. These are places for people who are resident in direct provision, where they can express themselves with confidence and in confidential circumstances and say what their concerns are, and where we can create channels of communication to convey those concerns to the various official bodies that they liaise with. We have a psychosocial support service for people suffering from mental and other problems because of the circumstances in which they're living. Sanctuary Runners is a very interesting and simple initiative. It simply means that people meet together, athletics clubs, students, ordinary people across society, asylum seekers, and they go out running. It's that simple, and it's been a runaway success, if you'll pardon the pun. The Sanctuary Mask Initiative, my colleagues Mike and Jackie are going to talk about in a moment. We brought in a scheme for laptops for lockdown. That means assisting people in direct provision who needed to have access to information technology and the laptops as well to continue with their education. That's been very important. Similarly, getting credit so people can access the internet using their mobile phones and therefore continue their education, as I've said, and other measures to address the needs of children. And Fiona has touched on some of the fantastic work they've done in the Glucksman Gallery to reach out to children in direct provision in terms of enabling them to be involved in arts and related activities. Then we have the Universities of Sanctuary, and this again is part of an all-Ireland movement, but we have a strong branch in University College Cork. And again, its purposes, as you see there, addressing the needs of asylum seekers and other marginalised migrants wishing to attend third-level institutions, because they don't have an automatic right to do so at the moment, and they're liable to be charged international fees, which would make it unaffordable for them. So we've begun with a scholarship scheme, which are offered across the Irish third-level sector, and in UCC we have 7 of those, and we're also trying to address the broader issue of fees and access for others who wish to attend third level and don't currently have the means to do so. So these scholarship schemes we have at the moment, you have the UCC Sanctuary Scholarships, and there are 7 students benefiting from those. And we also offer scholarships of a more modest kind for people attending diploma and certificate courses in adult and continuing education. These wouldn't be a full-time education in the same way, but again, they provide a vital access pathway to the educational system for people who wouldn't otherwise have it. And then beyond that, there's a range of other activities ongoing. So we have, for instance, the Scholars at Risk Network, which is an international network, and that enables people coming from maybe universities and countries where they themselves are at risk. So we would try to provide them with an opportunity to work in their profession, academics, here in Ireland. Then there are things like rehearsal space for theatres, helping people get into employment when they do have that opportunity, and simple things like there's a girls' hip-hop group run by the Migrant Rights Centre in collaboration with some of the people here in UCC. It's been a runaway success. They're brilliant. Providing people with access to library and computer facilities and theatre, all of these kind of things, again, enable people to be drawn into participating, and ultimately it's another pathway to integration. Other things we've done include our participation in the Talwar network, which was touched on already by Martin. And we've recently been working with the University of Veracruz in Mexico and learning from them about how they deal with these issues, as we ourselves have tried to develop new models ourselves. And we've worked with our neighbours here in Cork in the Institute of Technology, which is the other third-level institution in Cork, to develop models for this scholarship scheme. We have the students, who Fiona mentioned already, amazing active people organising outreach to other young people in the asylum seeking and migrant community. And then we also obviously liaise closely. A lot of us are involved in both the city and the University of Sanctuary networks. And as part of all this, we have an annual Refugee Week now, in which we invite speakers to address various issues to do with inequality, refugee contributions to society, and refugee experiences. So it's really about raising the awareness and the consciousness across the campus and beyond of these issues. So future plans, and I'm just about to conclude. We want to continue obviously with the scholarship scheme. We also want to address more centrally, the more general question of access, which is still not available to many people in direct provision. And that's a major concern, because nowadays third level education is something which people would regard as an essential part of their formation. Raising capacity of UCC students and staff, because we address both, to involve themselves in awareness raising and advocacy work to challenge racism on the broader sense. And that is a new thing for us, because, as I say, it's quite a recent development that we've become such a mixed society. Sanctuary Sports Initiative, I've already mentioned, Sanctuary Runners being a case in point, and the development of new certificate courses. So our challenges going forward, apart from the ones I've mentioned, the picture you see here, by the way, is the webpage of the Sanctuary Runners, and it's a great example of this kind of joint initiative, which isn't heavily political. It simply encourages people to become involved. And you have those principles there of solidarity, friendship, and respect. We do need to go further in terms of other access pathways. So, for instance, the refugee arriving from Syria, to give an example, encountering Irish education and culture for the first time, maybe as a teenager, they need particular assistance and support in order to fit into our society. Those are the kind of questions where we need to go next. We also need to develop outreach to other migrant communities, ordinary migrant workers here and their families. They may not always find it that easy to integrate, and part of our task is to forward that process, both at official and at ordinary social and informal personal level with people. There is an issue about deportations, and that's something we have to discuss as well. How do we deal with the problem of a student, for instance, who may find that he or she is subject to a deportation order in the middle of their education? And that's something which we need to take further with the authorities in Dublin and the immigration control in particular. And finally, just to repeat that principle that is central to all our work, integration begins on day one. Not after all the paperwork is resolved, not after waiting for several years maybe before everything is resolved, but really a person should be enabled to be as full a part of society as they can be from the moment they arrive. So I'll stop there and thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Pirish. As you were speaking, I was reflecting on the mission statement, which was prepared when we were applying to the European Commission to support the European University of Post-Industrial Cities. And I looked to the mission statement of our students. So we had a student body who also contributed, and obviously were clearly very much involved with the proposal, but also put their own mission statement together. So the students' perspective. And there's a sentence in there which reads, the collaboration between students, staff and researchers and the city stakeholders will not only give the students a deeper understanding of the issues that exist within a super diverse post-industrial city, but also teach them the skills necessary to come up with innovative solutions for these issues. And what brought me to think about that as you were speaking was the opportunities for students in being taught by individuals like you and Dr. Jackie O'Riordan and Dr. Mike Fitzgibbon, who will follow now, because the work that you're doing actively and the research that you're doing in these communities obviously completely informs the teaching program. And the students have an opportunity of engaging through the work that you're doing in these actual projects and with these communities, such that their educational experience will be truly enhanced.
Yes, and I think that's the central point, and that's why I began with this point about Ireland having been traditionally a country of emigration. Mm-hmm. We were the ones that went somewhere else and encountered the other in whatever form that person took in another country. I myself did. I worked with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon 35 years ago. Now we are a country which is very porous, very open. People are coming and going. Our own migrants that emigrated are returning, but we're also having this enormous impact of people from the rest of the European Union and from around the world. And that has both, as I say, a positive and a challenging aspect to it. But I think students themselves are now coming from classes in Irish schools where they themselves are already sharing space with people from many varied backgrounds. To us, it may be unusual. To them, it's normal. And they have a huge contribution to make. In fact, I think people of my age group are learning more from the young people that are coming in as students, as indeed you often do as a lecturer. You learn from your students as much as the other way around. So I think the student contribution to this entire process is absolutely vital, and they really have stepped up.
Well, thank you very much, Pirish, and there'll be a lot more opportunities over the next 3 years when we are engaging with the students in our 8 partner institutions. So thank you. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our final panelists, and that is Dr. Jackie O'Riordan from the School of Applied Social Studies at University College Cork, Dr. Mike Fitzgibbon from the Cork University Business School. Pierce mentioned earlier that they are going to speak about the Sanctuary Mask Initiative, which no better people than themselves to speak about it, but the context has already been provided. So you're very welcome, Mike and Jackie, and thank you for participating this morning.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody up to now. The context has been really sort of good to sort of show how our project emerged. And just before we start, we have a slight problem in that the electricity in our mobile home is gone. But if it does, if one machine goes, we have a backup ready to go online within a minute or so. So if we do,
don't worry at all, Jackie. If we'll be able to we'll be able to sing a song while you're waiting for electricity to come back. Continue.
So we're just going to talk about one particular project that happened as a response to COVID-19. And I suppose at the outset, it's important to say it happened because of the collaborations. It was enabled to happen because of all those collaborations that we were involved in. And so it was a collaboration between the Better Together, who are an NGO, very small NGO in Cork, focused mostly on supporting women who are living in the direct provision centre in and around the city and county. And then you have different societies, departments, organisations within University College Cork, the University of Sanctuary, the Feminist Society, and Fall to Refugee Society. So you've got a combination of staff and students from multiple societies across the university and multiple programs across the university. And we have an ongoing then relationship with the Cork Migrant Centre. And so they were very central in this as well. And they were supported by local fashion designer Charlotte and Jane, who designed the original masks, basically the prototype for them, and trained the seamstresses until a time came when the seamstresses were confident to work independently. So that's the origins of it. The vision basically was part of that ongoing work to improve the outcomes for people living in direct provision, for children, for women, as they're going, and particularly as they're going through the COVID-19, where people were getting very, very anxious because they're living in congregated settings. And so the idea came that we would produce hygiene face masks, so we'd partially be able to protect people themselves and other vulnerable groups, because what part of the original vision was not just looking at people in direct provision, but seeing how the women in direct provision could reach out into their communities and protect other vulnerable groups in the communities. And I suppose it's important to say at this point as well that at this time the direction, I suppose, on the masks was not all that clear, and there was an ongoing discussion on whether masks were actually, safe or not, or whether people would be more unsafe by using masks. So we took the direction of calling them hygiene masks and making sure that people were very, it was very clear that they weren't medical masks, and they were partially for a partial sort of protection, and that the washing and cleaning of them was very important as well. Okay, so that the purpose then really of the Sanctuary Mask Initiative was to manufacture sets of reusable masks to kind of stem the spread of COVID-19 in direct provision centres and with other vulnerable groups. And a secondary and very important part of the purpose of the initiative was to challenge those exclusionary narratives that sort of see people and residents in direct provision centres as dependent, see them through what we call a deficit links and as passive subjects, because that's where they are positioned within the system of the asylum process in Ireland. They're positioned as dependents and getting something from the state when they have strengths and they want to, and given any opportunity, they will contribute everything they can to society. So, that was a secondary but very important purpose of the Mask Initiative. So we were trying to harness the strengths of their population and recognizing their agency in responding to COVID-19 at individual and community levels. And as well as that, in doing that, then, focus on improving their physical and mental well-being, which was very sort of at risk in this time as well. The whole Mask Initiative, it happened very quickly. And it happened, there's a quote here, we got a message from in an existing group that we had, which was set up to support women in direct provision in terms of hygiene products, and that we were having a discussion on that. So Vera wrote a message on that at, as you see, 9:31 one morning. And by lunchtime, we had arranged for Olga, who had set up her seamstress business just before COVID-19 and now was limited to being in her direct provision sort of room. She picked up her machine. We sourced fabric. Charlotte from Charlotte and Jane had driven fabric from the Kinsale Road. Mike and I had brought a machine to Ashburn direct provision, and Mike had spoken to the University of Sanctuary about redirecting the Easter camp funds, which is another sort of thing we're involved in, to this, because we weren't able to do a usual Easter camp party we have for children in direct provision. So it all happened very fast, but it happened very fast because it was enabled to happen very fast because of the existing relationships that we had, which were forged over several years, and because of the trust within that relationship. Also, I spoke about the confusion, I suppose, and the lack of clear direction on masks. So we enlisted Angela Flynn from who's also a member of the University of Sanctuary, and she works in nursing studies, to be our health advisor, and with the public health advisor, Yvonne. We were able to do this very, very quickly because of the relationships that we had already forged and the trust that everybody had within one another. We sourced funding as well as the University of Sanctuary funds, from crowdfunding, and resources then from Better Together and from the Nano Nagel Centre as well. So I think we're going to, Mike's going to.
Yeah, just to give a sense of what was delivered from this. The seamstresses manufactured 9,000 masks, and they were packaged into packs of 3. So you wore one, and then the others were washed or dried or whatever. And we provided a very sort of well thought out set of guidelines and instructions with them. So we basically made 3,000 sets of masks, and these were delivered all across the centres in Cork City and County, and then to other vulnerable groups, as you mentioned, like Meals on Wheels, Penny Dinners, the Vincent de Paul, and so on and so forth. A second thing was that 20 residents making the masks, they were properly paid during this whole process, which ran for about a month and a half, 2 months. And they were paid at market rates for their work. And one of the things that happened there was, I suppose, most of these women were part of a group in Cork Migrant Centre. They're mainly asylum seekers, but it kind of, I believe, gave them a sense of confidence with regard to their own capabilities as a group. And that's moving forward at this point in time. Some of the learnings that we would have taken from this, we managed to get stuff out into the media. And in terms of the organization, we did have people who were ready and willing and who had the skill sets to be able to address things like getting our messages out into the media. But then, you know, once the message gets out there, the messaging is beyond our control. So, you know, the kind of direction, for example, that maybe RTE might have taken on it mightn't have been exactly what we were trying to say. A second thing was that while we knew that the market existed then, and actually there's a market that continues there, and I'm sure like any of the people living in Ireland and elsewhere will know that, you know, there's a burgeoning market for reusable masks. We couldn't continue it, and that's because it was a reactive process, and we didn't have the structures in place to support permanence. And if we were to do that, then we would need to restructure and develop an appropriate infrastructure. And as I said, the residents are moving in that direction, but they're expanding also what they would see as being, you know, the kind of target markets that are there. And they're working through this in a very kind of methodical and detailed way as we speak, and I expect it'll take probably another couple of months before they arrive at a full structure that they can use. So yeah, I suppose just to mention, in terms of, we mentioned there things like payment, one of the things that really stymied us was, how do we pay the people who are making the masks? Because we weren't a company and we didn't have the infrastructure to do that. And we patched that by using people like the Nana Nagel Center who were willing to do it as a once-off. But we would have known from the start that it was really, really important that the payments or anything related to this had to be done absolutely correctly, because otherwise people who are in the asylum system in Ireland, if they're seen to either, you know, be doing anything that's breaking the law, well, basically it's going to impact on their asylum application. So that's really all we have to say.
Well, that's an awful lot, Mike and Jackie. I know when you summarize it into a few short slides like that, it hardly does justice to the amount of work that goes on to getting a project like this off the ground from the get-go. And Jackie, I think you said it when you said it's based on relationships and trust. I think that's very, very key. Anything that's to be successful is based obviously on relationships, and it's also based on trust. It's very clear through this project, and if the other speakers can come onto the screen so I can see your faces, please, for the final minutes of our discussion. It's very clear that the university can become an advocate and a voice for people, and can play a role literally in that social justice advocacy. And the type of work that you are doing, and that others are doing under the auspices of the university's third mission, I think is absolutely key in that context. To conclude, the people who will be listening to this, first of all, I want to thank you all very much. You're coming at this through different lenses, different perspectives. But what is clear is, I think, and through Martin's work as the individual who's bringing this civic engagement, or civic engagement officer, it's very important, I think, to have somebody who can pull the strands together. And Fergal mentioned it earlier when he spoke about the city. He said there's a lot of innovative things going on, but quite frankly, we don't kind of know what they are. They need to be pulled together. So having somebody in place in a university, and for those university people who are listening to this, having somebody in post in a university whose mission is to eat, drink and sleep this every day, and to bring together the strands, because I think it's where we all come together that the innovations can take place at those interfaces. Has anybody anything to say before we depart? I'm trying to see, have we any questions in? No questions from listeners at present. Any comments from any of the speakers? No, I think there's contentment in that silence.
Jean, can I just jump in quickly before we finish?
For sure, Martin.
Yeah, no, I hear you on the need for that kind of central support in the university that helps pull the strands together. But I think that wouldn't work without the absolute, grassroots level commitment of and passion, which has clearly come across this morning. The level of detail and the extent of the work that people are doing is just really, really impressive. But I'd like to thank you for pulling us all together and for championing this session. I think it's been really, really important to highlight, the civic aspect of the university, particularly in the middle of the crisis that we're in at the moment. It's really become more important than ever and more essential than ever. And thank you also for bringing this in as part of the UNIC initiative, kind of as Fiona said earlier, which I think is really important, extending the reach of the work that we're doing across Europe and working and learning with our partners across Europe, because I think we're not so much, we are a country, but we're a country that's part of a union, and Civic University is an essential part of that union as well. So thank you, Jean, very, very much as well.
Well, thank you, Martin. And yeah, I can't say it any better than that. Thank you. And thank you to our partners in the UNIC consortium. And I think this type of forum is a very good start for the work that we're going to do over the next 3 years. So to the University of Deusto, for those wonderful people behind this forum, we want to thank you. So good morning and goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
all.
Good morning, goodbye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Well, many thanks to today's session attendees, and many thanks also to our colleagues, Dr. Jean, our distinguished panelists, for providing us the perspective of the fair mission of higher education institutions. Now, please be informed that the last and fourth session of this Higher Education Institution Summer Forum will start at 1:45. And to all the attendees, you will have the sessions link provided in the chat box of this YouTube live session. See you in a few minutes. Thank you. Bye.